Somewhere along the way, we were told that a quiet mind is only for those who have already arrived. Not true. The quiet mind is not a reward. It is not something you earn after you have fixed everything, after you have apologized to everyone, after you have figured out who you are supposed to be. The quiet mind is available to you right now, in this bed, in this darkness, in this body that has been carrying so much for so long. So let everything go, just for tonight. You do not have to solve anything right now. You do not have to be anyone right now. All you have to do is breathe and listen and let these words carry you somewhere softer, somewhere slower, somewhere you have been trying to get back to for a very long time. Let your body sink just a little deeper into whatever is beneath you. Feel the weight of the day begin to slide off your shoulders. Feel your jaw unclench. Feel your hands open. Feel the place behind your eyes begin to soften. And now, let me tell you a story. There was a man named Daniel who carried something invisible on his back. You could not see it. If you passed him on the street, you would not notice. He was tall. He walked upright. He smiled when people spoke to him. But if you look closely, very closely, you might have seen the way his shoulders never quite dropped, the way he moved through rooms as if he expected the ceiling to fall, the way he sat down in chairs but never truly rested. Daniel had been carrying the past for 31 years, not metaphorically, physically. His body had memorized every wound, every failure, every moment when the world had been too sharp and he had been too soft. His lower back ached with it. His neck was always tight. His chest held a permanent kind of pressure, like a stone had been placed there when he was 9 years old, and no one had ever thought to remove it. He was 9 when his father left. Not dramatically, not with shouting or slamming doors. His father simply stopped coming home. 1 week, 2 weeks, a month. And Daniel's mother would say, "He's working, sweetheart." And Daniel would nod, and carry that nod, and carry the not knowing, and carry the mornings when he would wake up and listen for footsteps in the hallway that never came. He added that weight to his back, quietly, the way children do. By 13, he had added more. The weight of being the man of the house when he was still a boy. The weight of watching his mother cry behind the bathroom door and pretending he did not hear. The weight of the other boys at school who seemed to move through life like water, loose and free and unbothered, while he moved like stone. By 23, he had added the weight of the relationship that ended badly. The one where he had given everything, and somehow that had still not been enough. He had replayed that ending for 7 years. Every night in the dark, running the tape, looking for the exact moment he had made the wrong choice. Looking for the thing he should have said differently. Looking for the version of events where he came out okay. He never found it. By 31, Daniel was exhausted in a way that sleep could not fix. He had tried everything: therapy, journaling, exercise, long walks in the woods where everyone said you were supposed to feel peace, and he only ever felt the weight pressing down, asking him, "When are you going to put me down?" And then one autumn afternoon, Daniel was walking through a park, an ordinary park, pigeons and old men and a woman pushing a stroller. He sat down on a bench because his back hurt, and he sat there for a moment. And without any warning at all, he started to cry. Not the polite kind of crying, Not the kind you do at funerals where you dab your eyes and straighten your jacket. This was the other kind. The kind that comes from somewhere beneath language, the kind that has been waiting in the body for a very long time, and finally finds a crack in the wall and pours through. He cried for his 9-year-old self who had listened for footsteps. He cried for his mother. He cried for the relationship and all the versions of himself he had sacrificed trying to save it. He cried for the 31 years of walking upright when every cell in his body wanted to rest. An old man on a nearby bench looked over. Daniel expected embarrassment, expected to gather himself quickly, say something dismissive, but the old man simply nodded slowly, the way old men sometimes do when they recognize something true. And he said nothing. And somehow, that silence was the kindest thing Daniel had ever received. When the crying stopped, Daniel noticed something strange. His back did not hurt. Not completely, not forever, but in that moment, it didn't hurt. And he sat very still, the way you sit when you don't want to disturb something fragile and new. And he understood, without anyone telling him, that the weight he had been carrying was not his fault, that he had picked it up because he had been a child, and that is what children do when the world drops something heavy near them. They pick it up, they carry it, because no one tells them they are allowed to put it down. But you are allowed to put it down. You have always been allowed. The past is not a debt you are still paying. The past is not a passenger who gets a permanent seat in your body. The past is a story that already ended, and you are here right now in this quiet dark. And the only thing your body needs to carry tonight is the slow, easy weight of your own breathing. Breathe in and let something old move toward the door. Breathe out and feel even a fraction of that ancient weight. Finally, rest. Daniel walked home through the park that evening, and his steps were slightly different, not cured, not transformed, just slightly lighter. And that slightly lighter step was the beginning of everything. Whatever you have been carrying, you can put it down, not all at once, not permanently, but right now, in this bed, you can set it on the floor beside you. You can say, I'll look at you tomorrow, but tonight you rest. You are allowed. Somewhere else in the world, in a penthouse apartment, 42 floors above a city that never stopped moving, a woman named Serena lay in an enormous bed and stared at the ceiling. The bed cost $14,000. She had chosen it herself from a showroom where a man in a suit had described the mattress technology using words she had not understood, and she had nodded and signed the receipt and thought, this will be the one. This will be the bed where I finally sleep. She did not sleep. She had not slept, truly slept, in 3 years. Serena had built a company from nothing. At 26, she had an idea that everyone said was either brilliant or stupid, and she had bet her entire savings on it being brilliant. By 32, she had 200 employees and a corner office with a view that other people photographed and posted online. By 35, she had the penthouse, the car, the wardrobe, the invitations to events she used to read about in magazines. She had arrived, everyone said so, and yet every night, every single night, the moment the lights went off, her mind began. It did not warm up slowly. It did not give her the courtesy of a few minutes of quiet before it started. The moment her head touched the $14,000 pillow, the thoughts began arriving like they had been waiting in line all day, impatiently, urgently, pushing against each other to get through the door first. Did you respond to Marcus's email? The Shanghai deal might fall through. Did you say the wrong thing to your sister at dinner last month? Yes, you definitely said the wrong thing. You should call her. Why haven't you called her? Because you are terrible at maintaining relationships. That is why you are alone. You are alone because you prioritize this company over every person who ever tried to love you. The company is successful, but you are 35 and alone. And what does that say about your values? Also the Shanghai deal. Also Marcus's email. Also you have a board meeting in 4 days and you have not prepared. And she would sit up, turn on a lamp, drink water, check her phone, put the phone down, turn off the lamp, lie back down, and the thoughts would be there, waiting, patient as wolves. She had tried medication. It worked for a while and then it didn't. She had tried meditation apps and found herself simultaneously meditating and making mental to-do lists. She had tried expensive retreats in Bali and Sedona where she sat on cushions in linen clothing and thought about work while an instructor told her to let go of thinking. She could not let go of thinking. The thinking was how she had built everything. The thinking was who she was. She did not know what was left of her if the thinking stopped. And that was the real fear. Not the board meeting, not the Shanghai deal, not her sister. The real fear was this: if her mind went quiet, the noise stopped. What would she find in the silence? She was afraid it would be empty. She was afraid it would be hollow, that there would be some terrible echo at the center of her life where meaning was supposed to be and was not. One Thursday night, at 2:47 in the morning, Serena stopped fighting it. She did not decide to be enlightened. She was not visited by wisdom. She simply ran out of the energy to resist. She lay in the dark and she thought, fine, come then, all of you, come. And the thoughts came. And she did not try to stop them or redirect them or breathe through them. She just watched them the way you watch traffic from a window, not in it, not directing it, just noticing. Car, truck, car, red light, Marcus's email, the taking away. He could not enjoy good things fully because he was always calculating how much it would hurt when they ended. He could not be present in happy moments because he was already in the future, grieving them. He told a therapist this once. She listened and then said something quietly that stayed with him. She said, "The future has never happened to you in your entire life. It has never happened." He thought about that. He pushed back. "But it does come," he said. "Tomorrow becomes today." "Yes," she said. "And when it does, it's no longer the future. It is the present. And you always find a way through the present. You always have." He thought about that for a long time. He thought about all the specific tomorrows he had dreaded, how each of them had arrived, how each had become a today, and how he had moved through each of them, even the hard ones, even the ones that had actually hurt. He had moved through them, not always gracefully, not without cost, but through. The tomorrow he feared had never stayed tomorrow. It always arrived and became now. And in the now, he was always somehow still standing, but this understanding did not immediately cure the anxiety. Understanding a thing intellectually and feeling it in your body are two entirely different countries. He knew the future was an illusion. He felt it as a certainty, so he tried something small. When the evening came and the pressure in his chest began, he would stop, and he would name 3 things that were true right now. Not tomorrow, Right now, the radiator is ticking. The blanket is warm. I have eaten today, not profound truths, just present ones. The radiator is ticking. The blanket is warm. I have eaten today. He could not be anxious about tomorrow and fully inhabit the ticking radiator at the same time. Not completely, not simultaneously. The mind, he discovered, could only really be in one place at once, and when he planted himself firmly in the ticking radiator, the future became slightly less solid, slightly more like the fiction it actually was. He practiced this for weeks. Some nights it worked. Some nights the anxiety was louder than the radiator and the blanket and the having eaten. Some nights the wave came regardless, and he could only ride it out, but slowly. The way the ocean slowly shapes a cliff, not in one storm, but across 10,000 tides. Slowly the texture of his evenings began to change. He was not fixed. He would not always be not fixed. The anxiety would come back on certain nights with all its force, and he would lie in the thin-walled apartment, listening to the radiator, and it would not be enough. But he had learned something true. He had learned that the future is a story his mind tells and not a place he actually lives. He lived here, in this moment, in this body, in this breath. And this moment was okay. Right now, wherever you are, this moment is okay. The future is a thought moving through the sky of your mind the way clouds move. You do not have to follow it. You do not have to believe everything it tells you. You can lie here in the warmth of right now and let the future remain what it always is until it arrives, unwritten. Breathe in. You are here. Breathe out. Only here. There was a woman named Clara who was burning from the inside. She did not advertise it. She was organized and professional, and the kind of person who brought homemade food to office gatherings and remembered everyone's birthdays. She smiled quickly and genuinely, and people often told her she was the warmest person they knew. Inside, she was on fire. The fire had a name. It was called Marcus, though she never used his name when she described the feeling even to herself. It was called what he did 3 years ago. It was called the way he had stood there in the kitchen of the apartment they had shared for 4 years and told her there was someone else. In the same flat, casual tone you might use to mention that you needed to pick up more milk. Someone else. There is someone else. He had been seeing her for 8 months. 8 months of Clara's life had been happening, alongside a different version that she had not known existed. 8 months of ordinary evenings, of cooking dinner together, of holding his hand in movie theaters, of trusting him entirely, and somewhere beneath all of it, a second current running, another life, another woman. 8 months. The betrayal had exploded through Clara's chest, the way you imagine a fault line splits open. 1 second the ground is solid, and then it is not. And the gap is enormous and jagged, and nothing will ever make it flat again. But Clara had not processed this as grief. Clara had processed this as rage, and the rage had been useful at first. It had gotten her through the moving out, through the divided belongings, through the friends who tried to stay neutral and couldn't, through the first year of rebuilding. The rage had been her spine during all of that. It had kept her upright, but the rage had not left when it was no longer needed. It had moved in. It had unpacked. It had made itself at home in Clara's chest in the way that long-term tenants sometimes forget they are only renting. She thought about Marcus at odd hours, at 3 in the afternoon while reviewing a spreadsheet, At 7 in the morning while making coffee, she would be laughing at something genuinely funny, and then something would shift and she would think, he doesn't deserve that I still laugh like this. She would be on a first date with someone new and perfectly pleasant, and somewhere in the evening she would look at this new person's hands and think, your hands are not his hands, and I hate that I noticed that. She would be fallen asleep and the anger would arrive like an alarm she had not set. 3 years and still burning. Her sister said, you need to forgive him. Clara had nearly ended the relationship with her sister over that sentence. Forgiveness felt like surrender. Forgiveness felt like handing him a form that said, what you did was acceptable. What you did not destroy something irreplaceable. What you did was fine. And she could not hand him that form. It would have been a lie. What he did was not fine, it was not acceptable, and no amount of deep breathing or letting go rhetoric was going to change that fact. But her sister had tried again. More carefully, she said, forgiveness isn't for him. He may never know you forgave him. He may never care. Forgiveness is just you choosing to stop carrying the fire. Not because he deserves it, but because you do. Clara sat with that for a long time, months even. She sat with it in the way you sit with something that is almost right but not quite. Turning it slowly, looking at it from different angles, and what she eventually understood was not that her sister was wrong, but that she was not yet ready, and that was allowed. The fire was not a character flaw. The fire was evidence that she had loved genuinely, that she had trusted completely, that she had been real and present and all in. The fire was proof of something true. But one evening she walked a lot now in the evening. She was walking along a river path, and she passed a family sitting on a blanket in the grass. A mother, a father, 2 small children. The children were chasing something, a butterfly or a leaf, something small and quick. They were laughing the kind of laugh that comes from the stomach and has no self-consciousness in it at all. And Clara stopped, and she watched them for a moment, and she thought, I want that. Not the family necessarily, but whatever is underneath the laughing. Whatever allows a person to be that fully here. That fully in this grass, this afternoon, this light on the water. She thought, the fire is costing me that. Every moment I spend burning is a moment I am not here. On this path, watching these children, feeling this particular late afternoon light that will never happen again in exactly this way. He has already taken enough from me, she thought. I am not giving him this afternoon too. She did not forgive him that evening. It did not work like that. But she made a decision. A quiet one, an ongoing one. She decided that when the fire came, she would not add wood to it. She would notice it. She would acknowledge it. She would even say, yes, you were real. What happened was real. And then she would look for something in the present moment that was also real. The river, the path, the light. She practiced redirecting, not repressing, not denying, redirecting. There is a difference, and it matters. And over many months, the fire did not disappear. It became smaller, like a flame that was no longer being fed. It still flickered. It still had heat. But it no longer consumed the room. Clara began to laugh again at things that deserved it, fully, without interruption. Your anger is real. Whatever lit it is real. You do not have to pretend otherwise. But right now, in this dark, the fire cannot warm you. It can only burn. So let it dim, just for tonight. not for anyone who hurt you, not to excuse what was done, but because your body is so tired and it needs the night to be soft. You deserve a soft night. Breathe out and let the temperature drop just a little. Let me tell you about a man named Robert who believed that if he could control every variable, nothing would ever hurt him again. Robert had learned this strategy early. In a childhood where the adults were unpredictable, where the rules changed without warning, where a good day could become a bad one in the time it took a mood to change, where he had learned that the only safe position was watchful readiness, the only protection was preparation. So Robert became very good at preparing. As an adult, he made lists. He made lists of his lists. He researched extensively before making any decision of any scale. He planned vacations 6 months in advance and spent more time on logistics than he ever spent on the vacation itself. He ran simulations in his mind of conversations before he had them. He considered exits before he entered rooms. He tracked weather forecasts obsessively. He had opinions about everyone he knew based on careful study of their behavioral patterns. He was frequently right about things. He predicted outcomes that surprised other people. He was efficient, reliable, comprehensive, and completely, exhaustingly, entirely controlled by fear. Because underneath all the preparation was the simple terror that if he stopped controlling, something terrible would happen. The exact nature of that something terrible was never fully defined. It was shapeless, enormous. It lived just outside the reach of the next plane. He managed to keep it at bay by staying one step ahead at all times, by never being caught unprepared, by never, under any circumstances, letting things just unfold. He was 43 when his marriage ended. Not dramatically, not violently. His wife had simply told him, with great kindness and great sadness, that she felt like she was living inside a schedule rather than a life, that she loved him but could not find him anywhere inside the precision, that there was no room in all his planning for her to be spontaneous, for them to be surprised by each other, for life to be life. He had not seen it coming, which was the worst part. He had run every scenario about his marriage. He had accounted for conflict and for distance, and for the usual erosions. He had not accounted for this. He had not accounted for the possibility that the control itself was the problem. He sat in his newly half-empty apartment for several weeks and felt something he did not have a framework for: helplessness. The future was genuinely uncertain in a way he could not plan his way out of. She was gone. He did not know what came next. He could not research it. He could not make a list that fixed it. He could not run the scenario and find the optimized outcome. He was simply in it, in the uncertainty, in the not knowing. And something strange happened in those weeks, something he would not have predicted. He started to notice things. Because he was not planning, he was not preparing, he was just sitting in the apartment with the halfness of it and the quiet of it. He started to notice the light that came through the window in the late afternoon. He had lived there for 6 years. He had never noticed the light. He started to notice that the woman at the coffee shop always drew a small leaf on the lid of his cup. He had been going there for 4 years. He had never noticed the leaf. He started to notice that the city made a particular sound on Sunday mornings that was different from its sound on any other day, softer, more uncertain, like it too was figuring things out. He started to notice that life was richer than his plans had allowed for. that the texture of actual living, the uncontrolled, unmapped, uncertain texture of it, contained things his spreadsheets could not have predicted. Warmth in unexpected places, small gifts from strangers, moments of accidental beauty, connections that arrived sideways from directions he had not been watching. He did not become a different person. He still made lists, he was still precise and organized, but something in the white-knuckle grip of his need to control everything had loosened, even slightly, even just enough to let some light in from the side. He started to practice something he called deliberate uncertainty. He would, on purpose, leave one thing each day unplanned, take a different route, eat somewhere he had never been, say yes to an invitation he would normally have evaluated to death, small things, but in the small things he began to find something he had not felt since childhood, something close to delight. The universe is not waiting for your permission. It is not asking for your management. It is already moving in directions beyond your maps, and you, lying here right now, you do not have to hold all of it together tonight. You do not have to solve tomorrow. You do not have to protect yourself from Tuesday. The great turning of things will continue whether your mind grips or releases, and release feels like this right now, this breath, this warmth, this letting go. You are safe to open your hands. There was a woman who traveled everywhere and could not stay anywhere. Her name was Maya, and she had a very beautiful Instagram and a very carefully curated sense that she was living life to the fullest, and a very old, deep wound she was always just 3 cities ahead of. She had been to 42 countries. She had a passport that required extra pages. She could tell you about the best street food in Chiang Mai, and the most breathtaking walk in the Azores, and the coffee shop in Lisbon, where she had written in her journal for 4 hours on a Tuesday morning with the sun coming through the tiles, and it had felt like exactly the life she was supposed to be living. But she could never stay long enough to feel it fully, because the moment the aliveness of a new place began to fade, the moment the unfamiliar became familiar, the moment she had been somewhere long enough to feel the silence start to settle, she would begin to research the next place, the next flight, the next escape. She was not running from anything specific. That is what she told herself. She was running toward life, toward experience, toward the fullness of being alive on a planet that contains so many places. But she knew, she had always known in the way you know things you do not look at directly, that the silence was what she was running from. The particular silence that settles when you stop moving. The silence in which certain questions become unavoidable. Questions like, who are you when you are not performing living? What do you want that is not a destination? What does your actual life feel like? From the inside, she was afraid of those questions. They felt bottomless. She had no good answers, and the absence of good answers felt like failure in a way she could not fully explain. She was in a small town in the mountains of northern Portugal when it happened. She had been there 3 days. The town was beautiful in the reserved, uncurated way of places that have not discovered they are beautiful. Stone streets, an old church, a cafe where the owner knew everyone's name except hers, and she told herself she preferred it that way. On the 3rd evening, she sat on the steps outside her rented room, and the town became quiet around her. Truly quiet. Not the dramatic silence of somewhere remote and wild, just the ordinary quiet of a small place in the early evening, when the day has finished its business and the night has not yet started, and she sat with it. She did not check her phone. She did not open her journal to make it meaningful. She did not make a plan for tomorrow or filter the moment through the lens of how she might describe it to people later. She just sat with the quiet, with the stone street, with the specific failing light of a Tuesday evening in October. And the questions came. Of course they came. She had been running from them long enough that they were extremely fast by now. Who are you? What do you actually want? What does your life feel like from the inside? And instead of running, she let them land. She sat with the questions the way you sit with pain when you finally stop fighting it. Just present with it, not solving it, not running from it, just letting it be the question it was. And she found something unexpected. The questions were not bottomless. They were just questions. They had weight and texture, and they were uncomfortable, but they did not consume her. She sat with them, and the sky darkened slowly above the stone street, and somewhere a dog barked once and went quiet again, and she was still there, still intact, still breathing. The silence she had been running from for years was not empty. It was full of her, the actual her, not the traveling version or the Instagram version or the performing version, the version that had never needed a beautiful backdrop to be worth knowing. She stayed in that town for 11 days, the longest she had been anywhere in 4 years. She learned the cafe owner's name. He learned hers. She did not document very much of it. When she left differently, not running ahead, just walking, knowing the silence would be there when she arrived, knowing it was not something to be afraid of. The silence you are afraid of is full of you right now, as everything goes quiet around you, as the noise of the day recedes, as the stillness settles like snow in the room where you are lying. This quiet is not empty. You are in it, breathing, real. Let the quiet be what it has always been. The only place you are ever truly going to find yourself. Somewhere in a house with photographs on every wall, a woman named Diane was learning to live alongside the unlivable. Her son had died 14 months ago. He was 26. He had gone to sleep one night and had not woken up. A thing his body had been quietly building inside itself for years without knowing how to announce it. And then, one morning, he was gone. She had been told many things in the 14 months. She had been told time heals. She had been told he was in a better place. She had been told he would want her to be happy. She had been told grief has stages and that she was probably in one and would move to the next. People said these things with such genuine love that she accepted them graciously and said thank you and went home and felt none of them, because grief, real grief, did not feel like stages. It did not feel like a passage or a journey or something you moved through. It felt like weather. It came without schedule. It came in waves, and the waves did not diminish neatly the way everyone said they would. They came large and small, and sometimes when she had been fine for 3 days, the fourth would bring one that knocked her completely flat. She would be in the grocery store and see the particular brand of cereal he had loved, and the wave would come, and she would have to put her hand on the cart and breathe. She had started to feel guilty about the grief. 14 months. Other people had moved on faster. Other people, she had heard, came back to themselves more quickly. She worried that the depth of her grief said something pathological about her. She worried she was doing it wrong. Even grief she worried about doing wrong. She had a single session with a grief counselor who said one thing that she held on to. The counselor said, "Grief is not a sign that something is wrong with you. Grief is love with nowhere to go." Diane turned that over many times. Love with nowhere to go. She thought about all the love she still had, all the things she had wanted to tell her son that there was no longer anyone to receive, all the future conversations that would never happen, all the ordinary moments of care, the checking in, the cooking his favorite foods when he came home, the worrying about him in the particular and specific way that you worry about someone whose whole life you have been present for. All of that love was still there, still generating, still warm and alive inside her. She had been trying to turn it off because it had nowhere to go and the generating of it felt unbearable. But you cannot turn off love. It does not work like that. You cannot decide to stop loving someone because they have become unreachable. So she began to let it go somewhere else. She wrote him letters. She knew he would not read them, but the writing of them was a way of sending the love into the air, into the page, into the somewhere that she chose to believe existed even though she had no proof of it. She cooked his favorite foods on his birthday and invited people he had loved, and they ate together and told stories about him, and the grief was enormous and present, and also, somehow, it had company. She began to see the grief not as evidence of damage, but as the form her love was taking now. It was not broken love. It was not sick love. It was the same love it had always been in a new shape. The shape that love takes when it can no longer be given directly to its person. The wave still came in the grocery store. She still sometimes had to put her hand on the cart, but she no longer was afraid of the wave. She had learned it was survivable. She had survived it now hundreds of times. Each time it came and each time it passed, and each time she was still standing afterward. She was not cured. She did not expect to be cured, but she had learned something true. She could carry the love, and she could carry the loss, and she could carry both of them at the same time, and she could still walk through her days and find moments within them that were good. The grief did not need to end. It only needed to find a shape she could carry. If you are carrying something like that tonight, something that feels too big and too permanent to ever put down, you do not have to put it down. You do not have to stop loving what you lost. You do not have to move through stages or arrive at acceptance as though it is a destination with a fixed address. You only have to breathe tonight, one breath at a time, one night at a time. The wave will pass, it always has, and when it does, you will still be here, still breathing, still carrying the love in whatever shape it needs to take. There was a young woman named Priya who had been chasing the perfect version of herself for as long as she could remember, and she was so tired. She could trace it back to the first report card, where someone had written, "Priya is excellent, but could do better." She had been 9, she had gotten 100 in 3 subjects and 94 in the 4th. The 94 had burned in a way the hundreds had not satisfied. She had filed that away without understanding she was filing it. 94 is not enough. By 16 she had a system, a very comprehensive system for becoming perfect. Grades had to be above a certain threshold. Her body had to maintain a specific shape. Her friendships had to be managed with care. Her room had to be kept a particular way. She had to be helpful without being needy, interesting without being strange, ambitious without being threatening, She had to want the right things and feel the right feelings in the right proportions. It was exhausting even thinking about it. And yet she could not stop. Because underneath the system was a belief she had never fully examined, that the imperfect version of herself was unacceptable, that there was a conditional quality to her worth, that she was loved by the world in proportion to how well she performed. And if her performance slipped, the love might slip too. She did not know where the belief came from. Probably many places. Probably no single source was to blame. The culture, the competitive school, the parent who meant well and calibrated praise very precisely, the friend who had once said something thoughtless, the accumulation of 1,000 small messages that together built a very sturdy wall. At 28, she burned out, completely, the way a machine burns out when it has been running too long at too high a temperature. She got sick in a vague way that doctors took several months to properly categorize as exhaustion. She could not work at her usual pace. She could not maintain the system. The system began to slip. And she waited, with tremendous anxiety, for the world to confirm what she had always feared, that without the performance, she was not enough. She lay in bed for several weeks, genuinely ill, unable to perform. And the world did not withdraw. Her friends called, brought food, sat with her. Her family was worried and kind. Her colleagues, people she had always managed at a careful professional distance, sent messages that were warmer than she had expected, more personal, more genuine. The version of her that they were responding to was not the performing version. It was the diminished version, the sick one, the one who could not hold it together. And they were responding to her with care. She lay there and tried to understand that. She tried to integrate the data. It did not fit the belief. The belief said performance equals worth. The data said that even without the performance, the love was there, not conditional, just there. It took a long time for her mind to allow that to be true. Beliefs built over decades do not restructure in a week of illness, but the crack was there, and she noticed it. And she began slowly to examine the architecture. She began to ask, what if the perfect version is never coming? What if this, right here, this imperfect, sometimes struggling, sometimes failing, sometimes genuinely wonderful version, what if this is already the real one? What if there is nothing to arrive at? What if the arriving is this? She did not become comfortable with imperfection overnight. She still flinched at errors. She still felt the pull of the system, but she began to practice something radical. She began to allow things to be unfinished, to let a task be done but not perfect, to let a meal be imperfect and eat it anyway, to send a message without rereading it 5 times. Small rebellions against the tyranny of her own standards. And she found each time she let something be imperfect and nothing terrible happened, the anxiety around imperfection decreased, fractionally, not all at once, not permanently, but fractionally, grain by grain. The perfect version of you is not coming. She was never real. The real version is this one, the one that is tired right now, the one that has tried so hard today and maybe gotten some of it wrong and is lying here wondering if they are enough. You are enough. Not when you have fixed everything, not when you have achieved the next thing right now. In this imperfect moment, in this imperfect body, in this one ordinary life. You are enough. Rest now. There was a man named James who knew, in some clear and quiet part of himself, that the relationship was over. He had known it for about a year. He knew the way you know things when you let yourself be very honest in the dark at 3 in the morning. He knew from the way his heart had gradually, quietly, simply stopped expecting anything from her. The way a muscle stops expecting to be used. But knowing and leaving are not the same country, because he loved her. He had loved her for 4 years, and whatever had gone wrong between them, whatever the two of them had done to the structure of the thing over time, the love itself was still there. It had changed shape. It had become something careful and painful and laced with disappointment and old arguments, but it was still love. And you cannot just cut love out of yourself the way you remove something from a pocket. And so he stayed, and he tried. He initiated conversations that ended badly. He suggested therapy, and she said she would think about it, and she thought about it indefinitely. He asked her what she needed, and the answer kept changing or disappearing entirely. He tried to be better, kinder, quieter, louder, more present, less intense. He remade himself in small and large ways, trying to find the configuration of himself that she could love back. She could not love him back, not in the way that he needed, not in the sustained, present, mutual way that love needs to be sustained to survive. She was not a villain in this story. She was not cruel or deliberately withholding. She was simply somewhere else, in some internal landscape that James could not enter, and she did not particularly want to leave it. James came to understand this slowly. The way you understand the ocean slowly when you are in it. He could feel it. The fundamental aloneness of loving someone who was somewhere he could not reach. He could feel it in his body, in his chest, in the way he talked less and less over dinner because less and less of what he said landed. The toxicity was not dramatic. No one was screaming. There were no thrown objects. The toxicity was quieter and in some ways worse. It was the slow suffocation of a man who kept pouring himself into a vessel that had a crack in the bottom. He poured, and it kept emptying, and he believed each time that if he just poured more carefully this time, it would hold. It would not hold. He sat with a friend one evening who knew them both. The friend said nothing for a long time and then said, "The definition of love is not staying. Sometimes love knows when to leave." James sat with that. He tested it against everything he believed about commitment and loyalty and not giving up. He weighed it against his fear, which was enormous, of being alone, of starting again, of admitting that 4 years had led here, of grieving someone who was still alive and sitting across from him at the dinner table. He did not leave suddenly. He left the way a tide leaves. Gradually, first he left certain conversations, then certain rooms, then certain plans, and eventually, one autumn evening, he sat down with her and said the thing he had been not saying for a year, and she did not fight it, which told him everything. He cried in the car afterward for a long time, great heaving waves of grief that felt almost like relief, because he had been holding the breath of that conversation for so long that the exhale was enormous. The months that followed were not easy. The silence of the apartment without her was huge and specific. He ate badly for a while. He called his mother more than he had in years. He had some very long and honest conversations with friends he had neglected during the relationship. And slowly, the quality of his days began to change. He began to find himself again. The version of himself that had existed before he had spent years trying to reconfigure himself into something she could love. He had forgotten how much he liked that person. If you are lying here tonight, thinking about someone who costs you more than they give, you do not have to decide anything right now. You are not required to be brave tonight. Tonight, you only rest. But somewhere in the honesty of this dark, let yourself know what you already know. The quietest voice in the room is often the truest one. Listen to it. There was a woman who had been invisible her whole life and had decided tonight to simply be that. Her name was Lena, and she was not remarkable in the ways the world generally notices. She was not striking to look at. She did not have the particular social ease that makes people in groups turn towards you like flowers toward light. She was the kind of person who could arrive at a party and leave it, and most people would not be entirely certain they had seen her. She had learned this about herself early and had spent years in the trying, in the being louder and more present and more deliberately interesting, in the cultivating of opinions she thought would make her more vivid to others. It had never quite worked, not fully, not in the way she wanted. She would try to hold the attention of a room and feel it sliding away. She would tell a story and watch someone's eyes drift slightly to the left. She would make a point in a meeting and have it ignored, and then someone else would make the same point 5 minutes later, and the room would respond. She had internalized all of this as evidence of a deficiency in herself. She was not enough somehow, not the right kind of presence, not the kind of person the world lights up for. She carried this as a quiet, permanent ache, not devastating, not sharp, just there. The ache of someone who has been told by 1,000 small moments that they do not quite register. And then one winter evening, alone in her apartment, she was making tea. Ordinary tea. The kettle was boiling and she was standing at the window watching the street below and the light on the wet pavement, and she had this thought, unbidden, strange, clear as a bell. I see myself. She turned it over. I see myself. She thought, I know exactly who I am. I know my own mind intimately. I know what moves me and what bores me and what makes me laugh until I am embarrassing, and what breaks my heart quietly, and what I think about at 3 a.m. when the world is not watching. I know all of this with a precision and depth that no one else in the world possesses. I am the only expert on myself that will ever exist. And I have been spending years grieving that other people do not know these things, while I hold them all right here. The tea was ready. She poured it. She sat down with it, and the streetlight on the wet pavement, and the particular quiet of a winter evening alone, and she sat with herself, fully, without trying to make herself more interesting or more visible or more anything. She just sat with who she was. And it was surprisingly enough. More than enough even. There was more depth in the simple act of being present with herself than she had ever found in any room where she was trying to be seen. She did not stop wanting to be seen. She was human. The wanting did not evaporate. But something shifted in the urgency of it. She no longer needed the world's confirmation to know she existed. She carried her own confirmation now, small and warm, a private certainty. And here is the strange thing. In the months that followed, as she began to move through the world from that private certainty rather than from the anxious performance of wanting to be seen, people began to see her differently, not dramatically, not all at once, but she noticed it. The way a new energy draws people slightly, the way presence, actual presence, is more magnetic than performance. She had stopped trying to be seen and had, in some quiet way, become more visible. Not because the world had changed, because she had stopped needing it to. You are seen right here, by the part of you that is always awake, the part of you that knows your own mind, the part of you that has been with you through every version of yourself and has not once looked away. You do not need a room to light up for you tonight. You only need this darkness and this breath and the quiet, certain knowledge that you are here. There was a man named Thomas who had been born, he sometimes thought, with someone else's life already scheduled. His father had been a doctor. His grandfather had been a doctor. The family produced doctors the way some families produce musicians or farmers or people who somehow always end up in the same business. It was not discussed so much as simply assumed. The way the weather is assumed. It does not ask your permission. Thomas had gone along with it for a long time. Through medical school, which had nearly killed him twice in the spirit and never quite killed him in the body. Through the residency years of impossible hours and the particular loneliness of being in a room with death more frequently than any young person should be required to be. He had been excellent at it. That was the worst part. He was genuinely excellent at it. He had good hands and good instincts, and patients trusted him in the quick, intuitive way that patients trust doctors who are truly paying attention. But he had wanted to be a musician, not professionally necessarily. He had never been delusional about his ability relative to the world's best, but he had wanted music to be the center of his life rather than the afterthought. He played guitar beautifully in the half hour before bed, sometimes less. In medical school, he had not played for 6 months and had felt an atrophying in himself that had nothing to do with his body. He had tried to explain this to his father once. His father had listened with great attention and then said, quietly, but with complete certainty, "You will thank me later." And that had been the end of the conversation. Thomas was 39 before he understood that his father had been operating from love. Genuine, imperfect, controlling, misguided love. His father had wanted him safe in a way that was so deeply felt it had become indistinguishable from control. The medical career was not cruelty. It was his father's very particular vocabulary of protection. Understanding that did not make it not cost Thomas something. Both things were true simultaneously. The love and the cost. At 39, Thomas began to play guitar in longer stretches. He joined a group that met once a week in someone's living room. Amateur musicians, imperfect, delightful. He began to write songs, small private things. He recorded some of them on his phone, not to share them, just to hear them back. Just to hear the evidence that this part of him was still alive. He did not leave medicine. He was too embedded, and honestly, he still found it meaningful. But he renegotiated internally. He decided that medicine was what he did, and music was who he was, that he could have both, that they did not cancel each other out, that the life he had been given and the life he actually wanted were not, after all, mutually exclusive. He called his father and they talked about music for the first time in 40 years. His father did not fully understand, but he listened, and Thomas discovered that the conversation he had been afraid to have was less terrible than the silence he had been maintaining. The weight of other people's expectations is real. The love inside those expectations is often real too, both things at the same time. Tonight you do not have to carry anyone's plan for you, not your family's vision, not the version of you that was decided before you could decide for yourself. Tonight you're only you, in this bed, in this body, in this one specific life that is yours and only yours. Breathe in and feel the outline of yourself. The actual outline, not the one someone else drew. Breathe out yours. There was a woman named Sarah who had trusted someone completely and then been broken, and who now could not quite trust the ground beneath her feet. The breaking had been sudden, the kind of sudden that rewrites everything. A best friend of 11 years. Someone Sarah had chosen over circumstances and location and the natural attrition of adult life. Had done something that Sarah still could not think about without a specific sensation in her sternum. A cold, specific, very personal betrayal. Not a stranger's carelessness. The calculated choice of someone who knew exactly where Sarah kept the fragile things she had rebuilt. Of course she had rebuilt. You cannot not rebuild. Time does not stop for betrayal. Work continues. Mornings continue. Life continues its indifferent, relentless schedule. Sarah continued through it. She rebuilt in the way you rebuild something that has been damaged, carefully, with slightly different materials, aware of the structural weaknesses now in ways you were not before. But the ground had changed beneath her. She was aware of it constantly. She moved through the world now with a low-level vigilance she had not had before. She catalogued behavior. She noticed small inconsistencies in what people said and did, and she noticed herself noticing. She pulled back from closeness at a certain point. She was warm, but she was watchful. She set her chairs at a particular angle, close enough to be social, far enough to be safe. She hated this about herself. She knew it was happening, and she could not stop it. The vigilance felt like wisdom, and it also felt like a cage. She sat with a therapist who asked her once, "What would you need to feel safe enough to trust again?" Sarah thought for a long time, and then she said something she had not known she was going to say. "I think I need to trust myself, not other people, myself." The therapist was quiet for a moment. Then, "Say more about that." Sarah thought about it more. She said, "I trusted her completely, and then she hurt me. And since then I have been trying to figure out how to protect myself from ever trusting wrongly again. But I'm starting to think that's not possible. I can't have a guarantee. I can't screen people perfectly. Someone might hurt me again. I can't control that." She paused. "What I can control is whether I trust myself to survive it, whether I believe that if something terrible happens again, I will still be okay. I got through this. It was awful. But I'm here. I'm sitting in this chair. I survived it." She paused again. "What if the real trust I need is trust in my own resilience, not trust that the world will be safe? Trust that I can handle it when it isn't?" The therapist did not say very much. She just nodded, slowly. The way people nod when they hear something they believe is true. Sarah sat with that for a long time. Trust in her own resilience. It did not immediately change. The vigilance was deeply embedded, but it changed the relationship to the vigilance. Instead of being ashamed of it, she began to be gentle with it. She began to treat it the way you treat a part of yourself that is trying, however imperfectly, to keep you safe. She said, "Thank you. I know why you're here. I know you're trying to help, and I'm okay. Whatever comes, I have survived the unsurvivable. I can survive what comes. You have survived things that at the time felt unsurvivable. The fact that you are here tonight is evidence of a strength that is so fundamental to you. You probably don't even see it anymore, but it's there, in the marrow of you, the thing that kept going when it had every reason not to. The ground beneath your feet is more solid than the last betrayal made it feel. You are the ground. You carry yourself. Somewhere, In a small city she had not yet stopped calling temporary, there was a woman named Grace who was always waiting to arrive. She was 37. She had been waiting to arrive since she was about 25. The arrival kept getting redefined and moved forward. When she was 25, she thought she would arrive at 30. At 30, she had recalibrated to 35. She was now 37 and had quietly, without announcement, moved the arrival to 40. At 40, she told herself, she would have the relationship properly sorted. She would have moved somewhere that felt like home. She would have the work in a shape she was proud of. She would have dealt with the anxiety and the sleep issues and the over-reliance on things that were not good for her. She would have become, in some essential way, the person she was meant to become. And then she could properly live. She was not living, she knew that intellectually. She was working and seeing friends and exercising when the motivation was right and eating dinner in the evenings and watching things that made her laugh. She was technically alive and present and functioning, but there was a quality of the temporary about all of it, a sense of not quite settling into her days, because settling felt like admitting that this was it, and she was not ready to admit that this was it if this was not yet the arrived version. She went to see her grandmother one autumn weekend. Her grandmother was 81 and had lived in the same house since she was 32, and had lived what Grace privately thought of as a very small life, local, limited, without the variety and exploration and possibility that Grace had built her definition of a good life around. But a grandmother was at peace, in a way Grace had never quite been. She moved through her small house with a naturalness that felt like freedom. She made tea with complete attention. She had opinions about her garden with a depth of feeling that Grace brought to nothing. Grace asked her once, that weekend, "Do you ever wish you'd done things differently, gone more places, done more things?" Her grandmother considered the question seriously. Then she said, "I've had a life. Not the life I might have imagined when I was young, but a life. And a life is most itself when you're actually in it. I've been in mine." Grace drove home from that weekend with a very specific and difficult feeling. She recognized it eventually as longing, not for her grandmother's life, but for that quality. The quality of being actually in it, of being settled into one's days, not because the days were perfect, but because they were real and they were now, and they were the only days there were. She started to practice arriving. Just for today, she would say to herself, for today, this is it, not as defeat, as practice. For today, this city is home. This work is the work. This version of my life is the version. And she would move through the day from that position, not resigned, just present. The longing for the future version did not disappear. It is stubborn, that longing. It had 12 years of practice. But slowly, the quality of her days changed. She began to notice more, to feel more, to be moved by small things in the way that only happens when you are actually present for them. The happiness she had been waiting to arrive at had been waiting here for her the whole time. You have been waiting a long time to feel at home in your own life. Tonight, let this moment be home, not because it's perfect, because it's real, because it's now, because the only life that is actually happening is this one, right now, in this bed, in this breath. You have arrived. You are here. And there was a man who was so strong for everyone else that he had forgotten where he had put himself. His name was David. He was the one people called, not in emergencies necessarily, though he was good in those too. He was the one people called when the small, grinding difficulties of adult life became briefly unbearable, and they needed someone who would not panic and would not offer platitudes and would just, be solid. He was reliably solid. He had been solid for so long that the solidity had become structural. It was load-bearing in other people's lives. If he had cracked, some things would have fallen. He did not crack. He held up his mother through his father's illness, and then through his father's death, and then through the long second year after the death. That is often harder than the first. He held up his younger sister through a divorce that took 2 years to complete and left her with 2 children and a particular kind of stunned grief. He held up colleagues at work with a quietness and competence that kept things moving in difficult periods. He held up friends. He held up the people in his orbit with a generosity that was completely genuine and also completely exhausting. No one held up David, not because they didn't care, but because he had been so consistently fine for so long that it had never occurred to anyone to check. He had trained the people around him without meaning to understand that he was okay, that he didn't need it, that his needs were either not present or were already handled by some internal process that required no external assistance. This was not true. He came home at the end of a particularly long day and sat down on the floor of his kitchen. He did not know why the floor. He could not explain it if asked. He just sat down on the floor. And he realized that he was tired in a way that could not be fixed by sleep. He was tired in a way that had been accumulating for years. He was tired of being fine. He was tired of being the resource and not the recipient. He was tired of having feelings that he routed immediately into usefulness and never gave permission to simply be feelings. He sat on the kitchen floor for quite a long time, and then he did something he had not done since he was a small boy in a house where his own needs were not the priority. He asked himself, how are you actually? Not fine, past fine, through fine, and beyond it. How are you actually? He sat with it. He let it be answered honestly. He let the exhaustion be what it was. He let the loneliness in. He had been surrounded by people for years and had been lonely in the way you are lonely when no one is quite seeing you. He let the grief in too. Grief he had been so efficiently managing for so long that he had never actually allowed himself to feel it. His father's death, he had been so busy handling it for everyone else that he had handled it around his own grief. He had managed everyone's pain and had never quite arrived at his own. He cried on the kitchen floor for quite a long time. And then he got up and he ate something, and he called a friend and said words he had almost never said. "I'm not doing great tonight. Can you talk?" His friend said, "I've been waiting for you to say that for about 5 years. You are allowed to need things. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to be not okay. You are allowed to stop being the strong one for one night, for this night, and just be the one who is in the dark and breathing and allowed to be however they actually are. You do not have to perform okay tonight. Not here. Not in this dark. Not in this quiet. Rest, brave person. The strength will be there in the morning. But tonight, let someone else carry the weight. Let the night carry it. It is strong enough." There was a woman who had been waiting for a specific letter for 7 years. Not a real letter. No one sent letters anymore. But the apology. That is what she was waiting for. The acknowledgement. The day when the person who had wronged her would finally respectfully, clearly, say what they had done and say that they were sorry. Her name was Nora, and the person was her mother, and the wrong was complicated in the way that family wrongs always are. Not one single incident, but a pattern. Years of a particular kind of dismissal. A mother who had never quite seen her daughter as a full person, rather than an extension of her own needs and projections. Who had said things over decades that had left marks, and who had never once said she was sorry for any of it. Nora had tried to have the conversation, more than once. Each time her mother had defended, deflected, minimized, or turned the conversation to something her mother had suffered. The conversation always ended the same way, with Nora leaving and her mother not understanding why, or perhaps understanding, but choosing not to say so. Nora had done the therapy. She had processed and reprocessed. She had understood intellectually that her mother's behavior was rooted in her own damage and that she was doing the best she could within her limitations and that none of it was Nora's fault. She understood all of that. She could deliver it in complete sentences. She still waited. Every phone call, every visit. Some small, persistent part of her still tuned in to the frequency of the apology, still listening for the day her mother would finally see her. Her therapist said, "What would you do with the apology if it came?" Nora thought about it. She said, "I think I would feel like I could finally stop waiting." "And what are you not doing?" her therapist asked. "While you're waiting?" Nora sat with that for a very long time. She was not living in the present. Not fully. She was partly in the past, in the original wound, and partly in a future that might never come, the apology. And she was not in the now, not all the way. She was standing at a window waiting for a car that might not come, and the room behind her, the actual room, the room she was living in, she was not fully in it. The apology might come. She did not know. People sometimes changed late in life. Sometimes the conversation finally happened, but she could not build her peace on the probability of a conversation she could not control. She had to find a different door, not the door of her mother's acknowledgement, her own door, her own quiet interior closing of the account, not because it was resolved, not because what happened was acceptable, but because she could not keep paying for what her mother had done with the currency of her own present tense life. She practiced writing letters she never sent. Not to be cruel, just to say the things that needed to be said in order to stop accumulating in her chest. She practiced saying to herself, "What you did was real. It had consequences that I am still managing. I do not need you to agree with that for it to be true. And I am not waiting anymore." The waiting did not stop all at once, but she caught herself waiting less often. And when she did catch herself, she said gently to herself, come back to here, to now, to the room you're actually in. Is there a door you have been keeping open that you could gently close tonight? Not because what is on the other side of it doesn't matter, because it does, but because your life is happening inside, in the room you're in this breath, in this quiet. You can close the door, the room is still yours. There was a young woman named Elena who woke up every morning with a specific heaviness in her chest before she even remembered what day it was. She knew the heaviness. She had had it for years. It arrived before consciousness, before thought. It was there before her mind had assembled the context of her life, just the heaviness. And then, a moment later, the mind would begin its inventory. and the inventory would confirm what the heaviness already knew. She was not enough. She could not have told you enough for what, for whom, in what specific measure or metric she fell short. The not enough was not targeted, it was ambient. It filled the air around her the way humidity fills air. She breathed it, she moved through it. It was the background radiation of her internal life. She tried to trace it, in therapy, in journals, in long, honest conversations with a friend who would sit with the discomfort of honesty without needing to fix it. She traced it back through her teenage years to a childhood where performance was the primary currency of parental approval. She traced it through the comparison culture of social media, which had arrived in her formative years like a perfectly designed machine for generating inadequacy. She traced it through the relationships where she had consistently chosen people who confirmed the belief. People who needed her to be slightly smaller, slightly less than. Because that was the shape she already believed herself to be. She could trace it. She understood its genealogy, and still she woke up with the heaviness. Understanding is not the same as healing. She had to make peace with that distinction. What helped was something her friend said one evening. Her friend said, "What if enough is not a destination? What if it's not something you become after you've fixed the list? What if enough is just being, just existing, just being here?" Elena had heard versions of that before. The "you are enough as you are" message. It had always felt like something you were supposed to say rather than something true, like a poster, like a caption on an image of someone doing yoga at sunrise. But her friend said it differently. She said, "A tree in a forest doesn't ask if it's enough. It just grows in the direction of light as completely as it can. That's all. That's the whole job." Elena thought about that for months. A tree just growing, not measuring itself, not comparing itself to the other trees, not running an inventory each morning of its shortcomings, just growing in whatever direction the light came from. She began to ask herself, instead of the morning inventory of not enough, in what direction is the light coming from today? What is pulling at me? What do I actually want to move toward right now? Not should want. Want. It was a small shift, grammatically small. But it redirected the attention from the deficit to the direction, from what she lacked to what she might grow toward. The heaviness did not lift immediately. It lifted gradually the way fog lifts, not all at once and not without returning. But in the lifting, even partial, she began to see something she had not seen before. The outline of herself. Not the compared version, not the performing version, not the deficient version, just herself, just growing in the direction of the light. You are enough to breathe right now. You are enough to rest right now. You are enough to let this night be soft and this breath be slow and this body be exactly what it is, which is alive, warm, here. That is enough. Loss does not always come with time to prepare. Sometimes it arrives in an ordinary moment, in the middle of something unremarkable, in the space between one breath and the next. And when it does, language is not always available. The wound is too fresh and too large for words to get all the way around it. If you are carrying something like that tonight, something recent and raw and still not quite believable, let me simply sit here with you for a moment. You do not need me to explain it. You do not need metaphors or frameworks or the 12 stages of anything. You only need, right now, to be somewhere that is not alone. There was a man named Paul who woke up one morning and made coffee and drove to a meeting and came home and received a phone call, and in the space of that phone call, his entire life divided into before and after. His brother, sudden, completely without warning. The kind of loss that does not build up to itself, that does not give you any of the time that illness gives you, that terrible gift of time to begin to prepare. Just a Thursday morning that was ordinary, and then not. Paul stood in his kitchen after the phone call for an amount of time he could not measure. He did not cry immediately. He did not do anything immediately. He just stood there with the phone in his hand and his half-finished coffee on the counter and the morning light coming through the window exactly as it had been coming through the window 60 seconds ago when the world had been different. That was the unbearable part, that the light had not changed. He had expected the world to look different. He had expected some visible mark on things, some signal that the unthinkable had happened, but the kitchen looked the same, the light was the same, the coffee on the counter was still warm. He set the phone down on the counter very carefully. He turned to face the window. He looked at the light for a long time. He did not try to understand it. He did not try to make it mean anything. He could not. Not yet. Not in the first hour of after. He only stood there and let the shock do what shock does, which is to hold you in a temporary suspension that your mind creates as a kind of mercy. Not feeling it all at once. Feeling the edges of it. The shape of the absence already pressing through. The grief that followed was immense and non-linear and full of things he did not expect. He did not expect to be angry. He was very angry. Not at anyone, just at the structure of things, at the casual cruelty of a universe that took people without explanation and without warning and without any regard for whether you were ready. He was not ready. He would never have been ready, but he was not ready. He did not expect the way grief would be mixed with gratitude. He had not expected gratitude. But there were moments in between the waves of devastation when he would remember something specific about his brother, and the specific memory would contain so much life, so much color and warmth and humor, and the particular irreplaceable quality of that one person, that the grief and the love would be completely inseparable. He could not have said where one ended and the other began. He did not expect grief to be lonely even when surrounded. The loneliness of loss is not the loneliness of being without people. He had people. They came and they brought food and they said things with great love. The loneliness was the loneliness of being the only person who loved his brother in exactly the way he did. No one else had that specific angle. No one else had the 42 years of that particular relationship. That was what was gone, that angle, that irreplaceable specific knowing of one particular person. He carried it. He continues to carry it. There is no other option, but he has learned the way you learn things only through living them, that grief and life coexist, that devastation and beauty coexist, that on the same day, in the same body, in the same hour, you can miss someone with a completeness that feels unsurvivable, and also notice something that makes you want to be alive. Both things at the same time. If you are in the early of a loss tonight, I'm not going to tell you when it gets better. I'm only going to say, breathe. Just tonight, just this breath. You do not have to have feelings of a particular size or shape tonight. You only have to breathe. That is all. Just breathe. There was a woman named Claire who kept trying to return to a version of herself that no longer existed. She was 40. The version she kept returning to was 28. In the photographs from 28, she was laughing at a rooftop party, and she looked lit from inside. There was something in her face that she could not locate in the mirror now, something open, something like certainty. She had been certain at 28. She had not known she was certain. That was the nature of certainty at that age. You do not know you have it until it begins to leave. What had she been certain of? Hard to say exactly. Certain that things would unfold the way she imagined. Certain that the relationship she was in was the relationship. Certain that the career trajectory she was on was going somewhere definite. Certain that she was becoming something, some clear and satisfying something, and that the becoming was progressing on schedule. The relationship had ended at 31. The career had veered somewhere she had not planned at 34. The certainty had dissolved in stages, like something dissolving in water, slowly and then all at once. She grieved the 28-year-old the way you grieve a person, not all the time, but in waves. She would see something that reminded her of who she had been then, a song, a smell, a certain quality of summer light, and the grief would come, mixed with longing, mixed with the uncomfortable awareness that the 28-year-old had not known how good she had it and had spent considerable energy being anxious about the future. She had a conversation with a woman 10 years older than her who said something quietly true. The older woman said, "The hardest thing about being 40 is realizing that the person you grieve at 28 didn't exist quite the way you remember her. The certainty you miss." She was anxious about the future too. She just didn't know how things would unfold. Claire sat with that. The version she was mourning, the certainty, the openness, the lit quality, was it real or was it partly constructed in retrospect? Was the 28-year-old really as certain as the photograph suggested, or were the photographs simply the moments when the anxiety had gone quiet? She started to look for the moments when the anxiety went quiet now. She was still capable of that. She had found it in unexpected places. She had found it in an ordinary evening with a friend, laughing at something genuinely stupid and feeling entirely present in the laughter. She had found it in her work on days when it clicked and something she made was something she was proud of. She had found it in the 40-year-old body that she had so often criticized. She had found it simply walking in the morning, noticing what a morning felt like, aware with sudden clarity that the 40-year-old version of herself was also going to be the younger self she would someday miss. She is becoming something. She still does not know what. The certainty is gone, and she suspects it is gone for good, and she is beginning to understand that the absence of certainty is not the same as the absence of direction. She is moving forward into something unknown, and the unknown, which she has spent 12 years fearing, contains everything she has not yet imagined. You are not the person you were. You will not be the person you are now. All of it, all the versions of you that have existed and are still to come, are made of the same original material, the same essential you. None of it was wasted, none of it was a mistake, even the parts that hurt, even the years that didn't go according to plan, especially those you are becoming right now, in this bed, in this sleep that is coming. Something in you is resting and something in you is growing, and you do not need to direct it tonight. You only need to let it happen. There was a man named Michael who lived as though the world were a jury and he were always on trial. He was 45, and he had spent 45 years managing perception. He did not think of it in those terms. He would not have said, "I am managing perception." He would have said, "I care about doing things properly. I care about what people think. I care about being well regarded." But the caring had a quality of desperation that went beyond reasonableness. It had a grip. He would finish a conversation and immediately run it back in his mind. Had he said something stupid? Had he said something that might be misread? Had he been too much, not enough? Had the person left the conversation with a favourable or unfavourable impression? He could spend hours on a 5-minute conversation he would never think about again if the review had come back clean. But if there was any ambiguity, any moment where he might have come off badly, he would turn it over and over like a stone with a possible imperfection he was trying to identify. He curated. His social media was an act of careful construction, every post considered at length. What does this say about the kind of person I am? Is this interesting but not trying too hard? Is it warm but not needy? Does this accurately represent the life I want to appear to be living? He was exhausted all the time. The performance of being likable was a full-time job on top of his actual full-time job. The crisis came in the most unexpected form. He posted something one evening, something he had considered carefully, and someone he did not know responded with criticism. Not violent criticism, not cruel, just a direct, clear statement of disagreement. And something happened in Michael that was disproportionate to the actual stakes. His chest tightened, his palms sweated. He refreshed the page. He considered various responses. He deleted the post. He lay awake that night rehearsing what he should have said. In the morning, he looked at the exchange and knew it was minor. He knew this. He could see it clearly in daylight. A stranger's disagreement about a minor opinion. And yet it had caused him genuine distress, and that gap between what happened and how much he had felt it was the first real crack in the wall he had been maintaining. He started asking why. Why does a stranger's opinion cause this response? What is the actual threat? He was not going to lose his job. He was not going to lose his relationships. He was not going to cease to exist. Someone had simply disagreed with him in public, momentarily, without long-term consequence. He started to explore what was he actually protecting, and he found underneath all the careful curation and management fear, a genuine, old, well-rooted fear that if people saw him clearly, if they saw the actual version rather than the managed one, they would find him wanting. They would discover the absence of something essential. They would see through to where the performing stopped and find not enough. At the center, he started, slowly and uncomfortable, to experiment with not managing. He started saying things without rehearsing them. He started posting things without extensive consideration of reception. He started offering genuine opinions in conversations where he would previously have offered agreeable neutrality. He started allowing people to disagree with him without immediately trying to win them back. Some people did not like it, some people liked him less, and it turned out that being liked less by some people was something he could survive. He had feared it would be annihilating. It was not. It was uncomfortable, and then it was okay. And the people who liked the actual version liked him more than they had ever liked the performance. More importantly, he liked himself more. The actual version was easier to be. The actual version was not performing. The actual version could say a wrong thing without the internal courtroom convening for an emergency session. The actual version could be disagreed with and remain intact. He was still working on it. The reflex to manage was 45 years old, and it did not vanish in a season, but the grip had loosened. Tonight you do not need to manage anything. This dark does not have a review. No one is assessing your performance here. In this quiet, you are allowed to be entirely unmanaged, unperformed, unreviewed. You are allowed to be exactly whoever you are, completely, without the managing. What a relief that is. There was a young woman named Anna who had to make a decision, and every time she reached the edge of it, she pulled back. The decision was not unusual by the standards of the decisions adults are asked to make. It was simply change everything, leave the job she had stayed in too long because it was safe, leave the city where she had built a life that fit her perfectly 8 years ago and no longer fit at all. Step into something she could not fully see from where she was standing. She knew it was the right direction. She knew the way you know the true north of your own life when you are honest enough to feel it. She had known for at least 2 years. She had given herself dozens of excellent reasons not to move. The timing, the money, the uncertainty of what was on the other side, the very real possibility of failure, the embarrassment of trying and being wrong, the embarrassment of people watching her try and seeing her fail. The fear of making a mistake was immense. It paralyzed her with a completeness that embarrassed her when she looked at it directly. She had read everything about taking leaps and being brave and failing forward. She could recite the framework. She believed it intellectually in the way you believe in a country you have never visited. It seems real. Other people go there, but you have not been. What eventually moved her was not a framework or a podcast or a book or a conversation, though all of those were in the mix. What moved her was a much smaller thing. She was walking past a construction site one evening, and there was a building going up, and she stopped and watched for a moment. A crane was slowly lifting an enormous beam. The beam was hanging in the air, suspended between where it had been and where it was going. Completely in the transition, not grounded anywhere. And Anna thought, the beam does not look afraid. She knew that was ridiculous. The beam did not feel anything, but the observation stayed with her. The beam just moved from one place to another, through the air, through the unsupported space, without knowing exactly how it would land. She thought, I want to do what the beam does, just move, without knowing how it will land. She set a date, 6 months out. This is when I will do the thing. She put it in her calendar. She told one person, just one, because telling one person makes it more real and less theoretical, and she needed it to be less theoretical. The 6 months were very uncomfortable. Every week there was a new, excellent reason to move the date. She held the date. It was, she found, easier to hold a committed date than to live in the perpetual maybe of an unmade decision. The perpetual maybe was exhausting. The committed date was scary, but it had a solidity. She could plan around it. She could move toward it. She made the change. It was hard and it was uncertain, and some of what she had feared happened, and some of what she had hoped for happened, and the parts in between were largely things she had not been able to predict from where she was standing. There was a year when it was mostly uncertain, and she sometimes wondered if she had been wrong. There was a year when things began to resolve in the direction of better. There was a third year where she could not imagine having not made the change. The mistake she had been so afraid of making had not happened, not because she had been brave enough or smart enough to avoid it, but because the things you fear are rarely the exact shape they take when they arrive. The fear had a very specific shape. The actual experience had a completely different shape, less terrible in most ways, different in others. Walking into the dark is still walking. Whatever you are afraid to do, whatever edge you have been standing at, you are not required to jump tonight. Tonight is for resting. Tonight is for letting the body get soft and the mind get quiet and the breath get slow. But know this, the dark on the other side of the decision is not emptier than the dark you are already in. It is simply different. And you have already been in many darks. You have always found the morning. There was a woman named Rachel who kept going back. She would stop. She would be absolutely certain. She would feel the clarity of it in every cell of her body. This is over. This is hurting me. I'm going to stop. She would make the decision. She would mean it completely. And then 3 days or 3 weeks or once 3 months later, something would happen. He would call. Or she would miss him with a completeness that felt like physical pain. Or she would have a bad day, and he was still the person she wanted to call, and that wanting would override everything else she knew. She loved him. That was the simple and complicated truth of it. She loved him in a way that had become one of the organizing facts of her life. And loving someone who hurt you, that is one of the strangest paradoxes that human beings navigate, because the love does not disappear when the pain arrives. The two exist in the same body simultaneously. She could be hurt by him and want him at the same time. She could know clearly and with complete certainty that he was not good for her, and also feel that without him, she was missing a fundamental warmth that she could not seem to locate anywhere else. The people around her had opinions. They had been having opinions for a while. Some of the opinions were delivered with great kindness and some with slightly less. She had received the opinions and filed them away, and returned to him anyway, and then felt, on top of everything else, the additional weight of knowing that she had been told and had chosen this anyway. She tried not to judge herself. This was the ongoing practice. She tried to hold herself the way she would hold a friend in the same situation, with patience, with recognition of how complicated love is, without the internal prosecution that spent so much energy on the verdict of stupid, weak, embarrassing. One evening, she sat alone and she asked herself, with as much honesty as she could manage, what am I actually afraid of? If I walk away and stay away, what am I actually afraid will happen? And the answer was not what she expected. She expected the answer to be, I am afraid I will never find this again. I am afraid I will be alone. I am afraid I have made the best I will get, and I am letting it go. Those fears were in there, but they were not the deepest ones. The deepest one was, I am afraid that if I walk away, I will feel what I felt before I met him, which is that I am not entirely sure I deserve to be properly loved. She sat with that for a long time. The fear was not about him. It was about what life felt like before the certainty of his wanting her, even imperfectly, had replaced the uncertainty of not knowing if she was wanted. Loving him was hard, but at least it was known. Being alone was unknown, and the unknown for her held the specific terror of her own unanswered questions. She made a decision, not about him, about herself. she decided that she would do the hard internal work of becoming someone who believed she deserved to be properly loved before the question of him was settled either way. She would begin to build that certainty from the inside rather than borrowing it from the outside. It was long, quiet, deeply unglamorous work. There were no revelations, no single moment of transformation, just the slow accumulation of days in which she treated herself with more care than she had been treated. Days in which she made choices that confirmed rather than undermined her value to herself. The question of him, eventually, resolved itself. Not with drama, in the way that things resolve when you have genuinely changed the question you are asking. Whatever you are holding on to tonight, out of love, out of fear, out of the complicated mixture of both, you do not have to let go of it tonight. Tonight is not for decisions. Tonight is for rest. But in the quiet of this moment, let yourself remember that you deserve a love that does not hurt you, that you are worth that the soft, persistent voice inside you that keeps trying to tell you this has always been right. There was a man named Nathan who had become something others could not. He was not rich. He was not famous. But in the small geography of his family and his circle of friends, he had done something that felt disproportionate. He had finished the degree. He had gotten the job. He had built a stability that the people around him had not managed for reasons ranging from circumstance to illness to the particular bruises that certain childhoods leave on certain people. And he felt guilty for every good thing. He felt guilty when he ate well because his sister was not eating well. He felt guilty when his relationship was going through a good period because his best friend's relationship was falling apart. He felt guilty when he got a promotion because his colleague was passed over. He felt guilty for the apartment, the savings, the nights when things felt genuinely okay. He had learned in some wordless way in his childhood that taking up space with good things was dangerous. That visibility attracted something, that being too okay when others were not okay was a form of abandonment. His therapist had a name for it. He did not need the name. He needed the understanding. He needed to understand why the good things felt so consistently contaminated by guilt, why he could not allow himself to be simply okay, without immediately surveilling the landscape of everyone around him to check if they were okay too, before he was allowed his okay. The therapist asked him, if a friend of yours was in your position, would you want them to be miserable in solidarity with you, or would you want them to be well? Nathan thought about that. He said, I'd want them to be well. Why is the rule different for you? Nathan did not have an immediate answer. He had an old answer, an inherited answer, an answer that had the shape of love but the structure of punishment. He began to practice something. When a good thing happened, instead of immediately calculating the guilt, he tried to sit with the good thing for one breath. Just one breath of uncomplicated okayness before the surveilling began. Then 2 breaths, then longer. He also began to find ways to include people, not out of guilt, out of genuine care. He could have good things and also show up for the people he loved. Those 2 things were not mutually exclusive. Being well did not require keeping others from knowing about it. Being well and being present for people who were struggling could both be true. His success did not take anything from the people he loved. There was not a finite supply of okay that he was hoarding. The world did not work like that. His okayness was not a redistribution problem, it was just his life. going well, for which he was allowed to be simply and privately grateful. You are allowed to be well. You are allowed to rest in the quiet knowledge that tonight, in this moment, you are okay. Even if others are not. Even if you have people you love who are struggling. Your okayness is not a betrayal of them. It is simply you. Being here, being alive, being allowed to rest. The people who love you want this for you. There was a woman named Sophie who could not be still. She woke at 6 and went straight to the gym because if she didn't go first thing, she wouldn't go. And if she didn't go, she'd feel the unstructured time pressing on her like thumbs. She listened to podcasts while she worked out. She walked fast. She ate at her desk. She had meetings that went from one immediately to the next. She scheduled things in the evenings. She said yes to things that might not suit her because something was better than the alternative, which was nothing, and nothing was where the quiet lived. She had not sat in genuine silence, unprompted, in years. Maybe longer. Even in bed at night, the phone. One more episode, one more scroll. Anything to delay the moment when there was only her and the dark and the question she had been keeping busy enough to avoid. What question? She could not have named it exactly. It did not have precise language. It was more of a shape she had glimpsed once in a period of enforced stillness, a long power outage at her apartment, when she had sat for 2 hours in a room without screens and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the presence of herself, which she had found disturbing in a way she could not explain. There was something in the stillness that felt like it might demand something from her. Some confrontation with the fact that her busyness was not living, that behind all the motion and noise and productivity and socializing and optimizing, she was a person she had not properly introduced herself to in quite some time. She was afraid of what that person might need, afraid that the needs would be large, afraid that the needs would be expensive, that they would require changes she was not sure she was brave enough to make. She got the flu one February. 4 days in bed, no choice. The body had simply stopped. She lay there and was furious about it for the first day. She lay there and was productive about it for the second day, doing everything she could from a laptop while running a mild temperature, which made everything take 3 times longer and come out slightly wrong. On the third day, she was too tired to be productive and not sick enough to be entirely miserable, and she simply lay there. She noticed things. She noticed the way light changed in her apartment over the course of the afternoon. She noticed she was hungry in a way she had not noticed being hungry in months. She noticed a thought she had been having for about 2 years and had not allowed herself to complete. I want to live somewhere closer to the water. She hadn't finished that thought in 2 years because finishing it meant taking it seriously, and taking it seriously meant potentially doing something about it, and doing something about it meant disrupting everything, and disrupting everything meant going through the stillness on the other side where she could not predict what she would find. But lying there with the flu, she finished the thought. She let it be complete. And she noticed that a thought completed is not automatically a demand for action. It could just be true. She wanted to live near water. That could be true without being a crisis. She let a few more thoughts complete themselves over those 4 days. They were all manageable. None of them was the emergency she had been protecting herself from. The things her busyness had been keeping at bay were ordinary. Ordinary longings, ordinary questions, ordinary truths about what she needed. Nothing catastrophic, nothing unsurvivable. Just herself, waiting patiently, not demanding anything, just waiting to be noticed. In the quiet of tonight, something in you is waiting patiently. You do not have to immediately solve it. You do not have to take action on it or address it or confront it. You only have to let it be there. The quiet part of you that has been waiting through all the noise and the busyness and the motion. You can just let it be there. It's patient. It will still be there in the morning. For now, the busyness can stop. There was a night when a woman named Isabel came home to an apartment that was completely hers. She had chosen it herself. After the divorce, which had been painful and protracted and had consumed 2 years of her life in the way that difficult things consume time, she had finally had the apartment to herself, just hers. No negotiation about furniture, no compromising on temperature, no one else's timeline, no one else's needs threading through every decision of every day. She had expected relief. She had been looking forward to relief for a long time. She had imagined it. The relief of finally being able to exist in a space without constant management of another person's presence. The first evening alone in the apartment, she sat on the floor and felt terrified, not of anything specific, not of danger or darkness or the unknown future. Terrified of the silence, terrified of the size of the space when only one person occupied it, terrified of the echo of herself, terrified in the way you are terrified when you realize that for the first time in a very long time, you are going to have to find out who you are when there is no one else in the room requiring you to be something. She had been someone's wife. She had been someone's daughter. She had been someone's colleague and friend and neighbor and daughter-in-law. She had been, for as long as she could remember, defined in relation to someone. And now she was alone in an apartment, and the only relation available was to herself. She did not know what that relation was. She cried on the floor of the apartment that first night. Not grief for the marriage. The marriage was over, and she had already done much of that grieving. This was a different kind of grief. The grief of the blank page, the terrifying freedom of a life with no defined shape. She made a deal with herself. She would stay with the aloneness for 6 months before she did anything about it. She would not immediately fill the space. She would not rush into something new. She would not call people every evening to fill the quiet. She would sit with it. She would learn what it actually contained. It was the hardest and most important 6 months she had spent. At first, the quiet was just loud in its absence of something. She noticed it constantly. She cooked dinner and ate it at the table, and there was no one to talk to, and she was aware of this with every bite. She woke up in the night, and the other half of the bed was empty, and she felt it the way you feel a missing tooth. But slowly, something began to shift. The silence began to gain texture. She started to notice that the silence was not empty. She started to discover, or rediscover, things about herself she had not known or had forgotten. That she liked to eat dinner much earlier than she had been eating it. That she preferred the apartment at a temperature several degrees cooler than it had been kept. That she liked to read for a long time on Saturday mornings without interruption. That she had opinions, strongly held, about many things she had been quietly adjusting for years. She started to discover who she was when she was not being calibrated to someone else's presence, and she found someone she had missed quite a bit. someone she genuinely liked spending time with. The aloneness did not become the problem she had feared. It became the practice of being present with herself, of learning the interior of her own life, of becoming, at 42, genuinely and specifically acquainted with herself. She was not always okay with the aloneness. There were evenings still that pressed, but the pressing was survivable. And within the survivable aloneness, there was something she had not expected to find. Peace. Actual peace. Small and specific and entirely her own. If you are afraid of being alone with yourself, right now, in this quiet, let me tell you, you are in good company. Whoever you are when it is just you, when the noise stops and the performance stops and the relating to others stops, that person is worth knowing. You are worth knowing, and now let everything become very still. Let your breath come slowly, very slowly, like the tide, like something that does not need to hurry. We have been on a long journey tonight, through many lives, through many rooms, through the weight of the past and the terror of the future and the fire of old anger and the ache of love gone wrong. And now, we arrive at the only place we were ever really going, here, this moment. There was a man who spent 30 years looking for the moment when his life would actually begin. He was not unhappy. He was not unreasonable. He was simply always just ahead of where he stood, always in the next thing, the next conversation, the next project, the next year, the next version of himself that would be more ready, more prepared, more arrived. He sat on the edge of his bed one evening and noticed that he had been sitting on this bed for years, and that on most of those evenings, he had been somewhere else, in the future, in the past, in the replay, in the projection. He had been very rarely here, in this room, on this bed, with this specific light and this specific temperature and the specific sound of the evening outside the window. He had very rarely been actually in his life. And on this evening, he tried something he had never quite tried before. He sat on the edge of the bed and he chose to be where he was, completely, without any mental elsewhere, without the future, without the past, without the overlay of interpretation, or the weight of meaning, or the search for significance, just the bed, the light, the temperature, the sound outside the window. He sat with it for perhaps 5 minutes. 5 minutes is not long. It does not sound like much, but 5 minutes of complete presence, or being fully in the room you are actually in, is rarer than we know, is stranger and more precious than we give it credit for. In those 5 minutes, he felt something he could only describe as life. Not life as an abstraction, not life as the sum of his achievements or relationships or story. Life as this immediate, sensory, uncomplicated this, the actual thing, the thing that all the future had always been pointing toward. The thing that all the past had been made of, even when he had not been in it fully enough to feel it. This. And he understood in those 5 minutes on the edge of his bed that the present moment is not a placeholder between the past and the future. It is not the space between the important things. It is the important thing. It is the only thing. Everything he had ever experienced had happened in a present moment. Every joy, every grief, every connection, every meaning, all of it had arrived in a now, in some version of this. And he had spent 30 years moving through the nows as quickly as possible to get to the next now, which would somehow be more real. But they were all equally real. Every now, every present moment was equally real. This one, the one where you are breathing, the the one where your body is warm, the one where the night is quiet around you, the one where all the stories have been told and all the journeys have been walked and all the weights have been laid down, at least for tonight. And what remains is just this breath moving through your body, just this warmth, just this dark, just this moment that is not waiting to become something else. It is already everything it needs to be. You do not have to go anywhere. You do not have to become anything. You do not have to carry anything further tonight. The past is finished and it cannot touch you here. The future has not arrived and it does not need you tonight. There is only now, and in the now you are safe. In the now you are warm. In the now you are breathing. In the now you are allowed to rest completely. So let your eyes be still, behind their closed lids. Let your hands be open, fingers uncurled, releasing everything they have held today. Let your jaw be soft, and your throat be soft, and your shoulders drop one last time toward the mattress. Let your breath go slow, slower, so slow. You have carried so much. You have done so much. You have survived so much. And tonight, this quiet dark is yours. Every breath is yours. Every soft, slow, easy moment of this descending sleep is yours. You do not have to be strong here. You do not have to be enough here. You do not have to be anything here but the breathing, warm, resting thing that you are. Let the thoughts come if they come, like clouds moving through a dark sky, not stopping, just moving through and passing. You are the sky tonight, not the clouds, the vast, still, patient sky, and the clouds are moving through, and you are not moved, just wide and quiet and here and breathing and safe and slowly, slowly, slowly moving toward the softest place in all of this. The place where the body finally gives itself to sleep, where the mind finally lets itself be still, where the night finally holds you completely. This is the place. You have arrived. You were always going to arrive. Now, rest.